forms that you just read through? Any questions off the top? Okay, so let's just look through this here a little bit. Anybody started looking at events at all? Okay. Yeah, we'll just kind of go through it here. So we have a form. It has an ID. It's got a field set with a legend and a label with an input. Here they just did the label before the input instead of wrapping the input inside of the label. Another label and an input and a button with a type submit. Let's go live on this. Take a look at what it looks like. And because I've got two screens and it's not really letting me do that. Okay, good. So here it is. Here's our form. So the field set, remember it had a field set, and the field set had text in it, it has a legend. So that's the legend is attaching to the edge of the field set. That's cool. Like that, see that? That's kind of cool. Didn't have to fight for that one at all. Let's give it something. See what we love. And a score of 89, 98. And I'm going to click the button, and it added it to a table below. Let's see how that happened. That's pretty cool, huh? Yeah. Yeah, we might want to learn how to do that. So, on the HTML side, we've gone through it. Any questions on this at all? Right. That's pretty straightforward. Notice that there's names on these inputs, that they have this property called name. Okay. That might become important. Yes, question?
Field sets grouping all the input boxes into one.
It's putting a wrapper around it, which visually is that line around it, and then the legend gets put into the line. Let me zoom. Sorry, that's pretty small.
Put that right into the line.
Yeah, it just did that. Let's take a look at the CSS and see if there was anything else that was driving that. But I don't think so. Nope. Definitely not. Just being a legend alone drove it right into the line of the field set wrapper or border line. Cool. I like that. No problem. Do it for us. So here's the app. Let's take a look at this. So we've got a function, collect nerd fighter, and it's taking a parameter called event. Interesting. And then it does whatever it's doing, and then we have a kind of a main line that is saying we're doing a get element by ID. We're going to that form. Okay, we're getting the form and assigning it to this variable called create fighter form. So just to iterate again here, that ID is the ID that's on the form. I should really turn off this helper stuff. It really gets obnoxious when you're teaching, doesn't it? I kind of find it obnoxious most of the time anyway. But so the ID, so we got this whole form with one get by ID. Down here on line 27. And then using that variable, which is an element, see, we highlight it, see, it tells it what kind of a type that is. It's an HTML element. That's pretty cool. And so we can, on an HTML element, we have a method we've never used before called add event listener. So when we look at our JS file book, and what chapter was that? Anyone got it open, or what page is this event stuff on?
264, I think.
Okay.
Somewhere between 254 and 264, according to what's on the screen here.
Okay, so there's event listeners starting here.
Well, if you'll forward this at the end.
Okay, let's look at page 248. Okay. How events trigger JavaScript code. Pick an element that you want something to respond to when the user interacts with something. You want something to respond to it. You indicate what kind of an event that you're going to respond to. that you're listening for. You're listening for an event. And then you're going to give it the code that you want to run when that event is occurs. The next page over here, they start giving it to us in his example. So they say they select a text input. And okay, so they're given a problem here. The problem is to do something on blur. It'll show an error message if the username is too short. So this is that same example over and over again in 5 different ways, right? Name is too short. We've seen it inside the constructor yesterday, I think, as an example. You just saw it a few minutes ago where you can just have it as min length in your HTML right there on the input. Min length equals 4. You've got it. So that's kind of the easy way. Why would we go through an event handler? But anyway, we're showing you what to do. So it's looking for an event of blur. When you move off of a field, that triggers. You don't write the code. It just happens. It's called blur. So as a user is floating around a web page, there are events happening. So I'm in this field here, and soon as I move off, if I hit tab or something like that, I've triggered a blur event. Okay? When I
Between blur and like mouse out on mouse out or something.
You'd have to read into the details. I think mouse out will see mouse out. I have a mouse in right now on Score. My mouse is in on Score, and now my mouse is out. I've not activated that field. I'm not in Score. I'm still over in Nerdfighter, but I am having mouse ins and outs, I think, at this point, or also mouse enter. I'm entering that element's space or leaving it. Blur would be you've actually taken focus. Focus is the opposite of blur. Right now, Nerdfighter has focus. When I hit tab, now it's blurred, and I've triggered an event called focus on Score. So I've triggered an event called blur that's associated with the element that's the input for Nerdfighter. There goes my screen again. And then at the same time, because I tabbed into another input, I triggered an event called focus on that element. Okay? So back in our book, let's look at this little drawing here. So this is kind of a cool little thing. They're giving us an illustration. It's kind of a decision chart here. We have an event that's going to trigger a function. So they wrap this whole thing up, and the function's name is check username, and then it gives us a description of what that's going to do. It's going to check if the username is long enough. So now this is just describing, we've talked about pseudocode. This is kind of like pseudocode, but visually, using charting, using graphic elements. So get user is a process. We get the user, then we go down into a triangle, which is a decision point. Triangle in flow charting represents decision. So when we have a decision, like a question that ends up in an answer of yes or no, what code command does that make us think about? If else, exactly. So when you see a triangle on your flow chart, that's an if else. So our if else here, is username less than 5 characters? No, we'll clear the message. If it is yes, then we're going to show them an error message. So this is a flow chart of what we have to accomplish in our function. Useful when things get complicated to start flow charting it as a conceptual thing before you code it. So here's the next page over. Let's look at the code that flowchart generated. Right down at the bottom in the JavaScript on page 251, we have our function, check username. It does a couple things. It gets a message, and it gets a username, and then it checks the username is less than 5. So there's our if. There's our decision. And that's all we had to do. We're putting out a message or not putting out a message. So that's an event handler. So where we want to go to from here, let me find it. It's good stuff to read through all this stuff. This book is old, but it's really well written, and it's well illustrated. It gives you lots of visual examples, and that's why we're still using it.
The event handler, where do we put these in our plan?
We're getting there.
Yeah, okay.
Right now. We're getting there right now. I'm trying to find the page. Or we can just go. There's a page in here that has all of the possible events. Let me look at my notes here.
250, is that what you the different kinds of triggering an event?
What page?
250, the different ways of triggering an event.
Yeah, I thought. No. 3 ways to bind an element. 250 is bind an element. There's a full list. 246. Different event types. 246. Here's the list of events I wanted to find. So events are fired, and then they trigger scripts, and you can see there's lots of events. Load, unload, error, key down, up, press, click. We've been kind of using on click many times on a button, so it's kind of like an event. Focus, blur, form events. Let's look at that. Input, change, submit. Submit sounds interesting. We were just talking about having a button called submit. You guys have interacted with web pages. A lot of times you end up seeing a button that's called submit, right? When you've had to enter something. Reset, cut, copy, paste, select. Other kinds of events. Mutation events. I don't know about that. I'm not going to get bogged down. That looks like kind of dense. I'll move on. So, let's look at the code here on this page now. Now that we've gotten a little bit, and you're going to want to read more about events, but we'll.
Are we on 253 or are we on?
No, I was looking at the list of events on page 246. 246, 47? Yeah, that's where we want to be. What's?
Oh, that code.
On the example, can you do a refresh of that thing that we're trying to? You already inputted.
Yeah, I will. I want to talk through this a little bit. So here's our HTML and our form, and we don't see it actually trying to call
There's
any kind of function, right? Do we see it trying to call a function like we've done with onClick equals?
Yeah, now it's all Node.js.
No, there's no reference to a function label here. There's a button that's got a type of submit. Yeah, weird. Let's see what happens. And then, but we know it worked. We saw it work. So let's look at line 29. Someone asked. I think this is the question you were asking, Mark.
Yeah.
It's in the main line. You can see that. It's not in the function. So it happens. We execute this line. Well, these 2 lines, we have to get our element, and then we add an event listener to it. Okay, and what kind of event are we listening to? Submit. And what is the element we attached it to? The form. The form. We attached a submit to the form. The form has a button with type submit. That's the connection. That's the linkage. That's the wiring. The 3 things that make this actually happen. We have a form with an ID. We have a button with type submit. And we get that form through a document get by ID. Get element by ID, and then on that element we add an event listener for the type submit, and we tell it what function to execute when that happens. Okay? Any questions up to this point? Is that making some sense there? Okay? So, when the event happens, it's going to call collect nerdfighter. Now notice, we're not using the parentheses on the call. We're just telling it what function to call. We're not putting the extra parens right here. like we do when we normally like do an on-click equals handle me, do something, parens, right? We're not doing that. We're telling it, here's the function you're going to execute, but you're not executing now. You just know that when this event happens, then you know what to do. We also notice that normally we see that this function has a parameter coming into it of type any. You see that colon any? This gets into typing. So it's not been explicitly typed as anything. Later on, if we get to TypeScript, you explicitly type every variable you deal with. And so it would highlight and say, I'm expecting a event type or HTML event. So an event, we're going to examine that. And then we see an event prevent default. Let's take a look at console log here. We're going to put in a label. I'm in collect nerd fighter. As much as I don't like typing, it's worse to not know what I'm looking at. And I'm going to look at the variable called event. Okay? So, and I don't think I'm live, so. Okay. Oh, guess what? We don't get it. Why not? The event hasn't happened. Right. Okay. So let's make the event happen. Dave. Well, I'm only batting about 50% right now with the screen, so click the button. Aha! The event happened. Submit happened. Jeez. Okay. So let's drill into this thing. This is kind of interesting. It's got all kinds of stuff. Bubbles is true. Cancel bubble is false. Cancelable is true. Pose. Target. Current target. Default prevented is true. We'll talk about that. Source element. Aha. Now we're getting something interesting. It knows where it came from. So when an event occurs, our code passes the context of what triggered the event. And that's what becomes this thing called, this parameter, this variable called event when you go into the code. It is the context, it has information about the context of what triggered the event. So it has what element on the screen, this source element, triggered the event. It's got a target, so what was actually clicked. The target of this event is this form because it's a submit, and the submit is in the form, and it understands that submits are associated with forms. If I'm pretty sure I could break it right now if I were to take the button out of the form. So the button is out of the form now, so it's Dave and 40% score, and I click. Uh-oh, no event.
Yes.
Okay. Button's got to be in the form, or it doesn't understand what's going on. Command Z, back up when you try things. Instead of trying to remember how to undo it manually, just Command Z, undo, 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 till things look right again. So, back to the app. So it provides the event to this thing. The actual add event listener says, a submit happened, and here's the context. And it gives you a bunch of stuff like the target and the source and stuff. Events bubble up. This gets really complicated. We're not going to drill into it a lot, but if event is on form, it actually wants to broadcast that this event happened up to section and up to body. It might also want to kind of bubble it down into lower things. It tries to let the tree, your children know that this event happened. The form has the event, but it will try and inform that the children, hey, this event happened to your parent. And it's also going to try and tell upstream, oh, one of your children had this event happen to it, in case somebody cares. We don't use those patterns really anymore because it gets completely, you can't reason about the app. I know you have a question. Reasoning about the app, you've heard me say this. Anyone want to guess what that kind of means? It's the ability to follow the app, to be able to see what it's doing. You get to the point where things get so complicated, you can't really tell anymore. There's just too many things happening in too many directions. It's like driving in Italy, one of those big plazas where the cars are all coming in the same from different directions, and everybody's going in different directions, and you're an American and you just say, I don't drive there because this is insanity. That's what happens with events bubbling down and up. It just turns into insanity real quick. So we don't use that, but in the old days they did. They made use of that. So what we tend to do almost always is prevent default. Very rarely are we not. So we're not letting it bubble around. We don't want it to communicate. We got the event. We got what we need. We need to be in this form, into this function. That's all we need out of this event. So let's throw it away so that it doesn't keep trying to talk to other things. So quickly, yeah, your question.
Yeah, so in line 3 there, we declare the function, that word event. Is that like a?
It's not a keyword.
You could pick any.
You could pick any number. You'll see code a lot where it's just E. That's a really common pattern.
Okay.
Because it's so common of a variable in web development, a lot of times they'll just use E, even though we like to be explicit. It's just so common that it becomes easier to deal with as an E.
The program knows that too. It'll recognize it as events, even if
Well,
you have.
no.
It's the kind of thing that was passed in. We didn't even pass this in. It is an event.
That's what I'm asking, how does it, where does that get passed in? Where do we get the event object when we're passing?
Add event listener is a function, right? It's a method available to things that are HTML elements. This gets back to our we attach methods and certain we inherit methods. So certain data types have built-in methods. So HTML element, that kind of data type, has a built-in method called add event listener. It's a function, and it does stuff, including grabbing the context. So it does two things. It listens for a submit to happen. And then when that does happen, it says, oh, I've got a function I can call. And when I call that function, I'm going to give that function my context.
But we'll work without the event? Why is that event needed in the premise?
Yeah, and it says that it can be any type of anything.
It could be.
I don't know how it knows it is the
You're going to get a parameter here. You're giving a parameter when it's an event listener because the function of add event listener is going to give you that parameter. So you need to declare. I think let's find out.
On the function inside the parameter, that's the event because it's an event listener. It always has the event on. They go back to that add event listener. That's the format. So the submit is the event.
Is the event.
Is the value of the event.
It is the kind of event. It's the event
Yes.
type. The type of event we're listening for is submit.
Correct.
It's on, and we've attached it only to this one element, create fighter form. So when create fighter form triggers that type of event called submit, we heard it. We heard it. We're going to call this function, the second parameter, whatever the second parameter is, that's the function I'm going to call, and I'm going to give it a parameter. It's just, thank you. You got some way to help clarify this? Thank you.
Is there any way to work this out in the debugger so we can see?
Yeah, I did. Let's go back to the
Go back to event.
Yeah, I'm going to show you right now that without it in there, let's just see if this thing blows. So Dave, 98, Oh, it still gave us an event. Wow. Did I save? That seems a little odd because there's no variable here that's called event. That console log should definitely blow up. I don't know what to say. I'll have to.
Well, it's an event, it's a capital event, right? It's not.
Yeah, but my console log wouldn't know what to do if I don't have a variable that's defined. Yeah, you put events in here. Let's move on. I don't want to get bogged down in little nuances things there. Just trust, okay, you need an event. We got a lot to cover. So what are we trying to do? We get our table. We're getting the values of the form. Okay, this is getting down to the nuts of how we're getting that form into us and be able to do something with it. So let's pay attention here. So let's look at this line 9. We've gotten our table. Oh, we got a table. That's just for future reference. That's where we're going to put our results, right? So that's just for later. So we get our fighter from our event. Remember, our event came in, and it's got a target. Let's look at that in the debugger. Target. Target was the high score form. Look at the way this is structured. It looks like an array. There's element 0, element 1, 2, 3, right? What's our code say? We are doing target.fighter.value. Is there something called fighter in here? I don't see it. Is there a key called fighter? No. So that's weird. Wait, and we're in target, right? Yeah, I drilled into target. Okay, so what's going on? It must be doing a little bit of black magic for us, right? It must be looking through our elements and looking for one that has a name, I think. Name of fighter. Can you see? Let me get that bigger, sorry. So it did a little black magic for us. Normally when we see dot, we would expect that we could arrow into that, within the console and see something called fighter as a key. In this case it didn't, so something's happening with some black magic. It's able to do that for us. That's great. It's very convenient. I don't have to fight my way into all of this stuff to evaluate where fighter is. I can just use its name. Why is it fighter here that works? Because of input, not the label. Don't worry about the label. That's not even necessarily needed. But this label right here, this name, that's what triggers that, makes that work. So we get our fighter and we console log our fighter so we can see if we refresh this again, Dave, oops, and fighter is Dave and score is 22. So that gave us our fighter. And then we get our value, our score value, and we did a parseInt on it because it came into us as a string. Anything coming in as an input is a string, and then we put that out. Now so we've gotten our elements from the form. We've grabbed the values from the form. So in a bigger pattern, how are we doing on time? Okay. A lot of times, what would you do with a form data? Can anybody think of what kind of a normal thing to do with form data would be? Yeah, what else? Store it? Where? Database. Store it in database. That's the most common thing you're going to be doing with data, right? We want to hang on to it, because what's happening right now?
Because you're adding a new fighter.
So I keep adding people, and I keep adding Dave. And then I go home for the night, and my computer crashes, and I got to bring it up again because it keeps crashing my screen. And where did all my data go? I spent 3 hours entering fighters yesterday. Database, we got to persist our database. So the common pattern is going to be, you right up here through line 15, we've gotten everything we knew. We could compose that as a payload, say an object, make an object literal called fighter, and it would be an object literal, and it would have name is fighter and score is score. Okay? And that's our object. And then the next thing we'd probably do then would be to call an API and send this to the API that would write it to the database. The API does the work for us. We don't write to the database as a front end. We send it to a back end server and it takes care of it. That's where in this book you see those method, and it was saying get to some HTTP address. Old pattern. We don't do that anymore. The front end does not directly talk to other servers. The front end, it talks to only its own API. It calls its API, and the API calls the database. So that would be that. But in this case, we're just going to show it on the screen. So we're going back to things we've been doing them for the last 2 days. We're creating an element and we're appending it to something, a row in this case, right? And then we're appending it, the score, into the score column. And then we're putting the whole row on the table. You see this kind of pattern? Look at that. We're building it up kind of, we're creating a TR, fighter row, just an empty, now it's just a bare element, it's just been created. We create our TD, we give our TD some text, content, we append it to our row. We do it again with the next column, our score, create a TD, put the score in as the text column, text content for that TD, append that TD to the row. Now we're done creating the row, we append the row to the table. Okay? Questions through that?
Can you show us again the screen?
Mm-hmm. $100, $1,000. Yeah.
Oh.
Sarah can kick butt. Okay. So we can bring in data and we can process that data and do things with it now. That's pretty exciting. Just want to digest for a minute. That's a big one. I'll push this form demo up.
Thank you.
Yep. This is not part of tonight. This is the stretch goal on what's going to be at least a 2-day, so this will probably be more like tomorrow's work than the form. So let's kind of just shelve that then at this point, and get to what we're going to need to do tonight. Sound good? You need a break before we do that?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, yep. I'll stop the recording. Did I start a recording?